So today we're talking about learning, specifically talking about classical conditioning. So learning then, what is it? Learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior that is due to experience. Behaviorism, this is one of the theoretical perspectives that we discussed earlier in this course. Behaviorism, remember, emphasizes behavior, particularly behavior that you can see, right? Observable behavior. And we also look at the environment and how it helps to shape behavior. Conditioning is going to be the focus of this particular lecture. Conditioning is associating something in the environment and then your response to it. Okay, so conditioning is a form of learning. We're going to focus today on classical conditioning. So classical conditioning occurs when a neutral stimulus, so neutral basically means that this stimulus, and a stimulus can be almost anything, this object didn't mean anything before, okay? It used to be neutral, it didn't mean anything. But once conditioning takes place, this neutral stimulus brings about some kind of response because it is paired, it is associated with a stimulus that already produces a similar response. So the man who discovered this is Ivan Pavlov. He was a Russian physiologist, and he uncovered this process of classical conditioning by working with dogs in his laboratory. So I want you to make sure that you watch the classical conditioning video and then go through this lecture again. Okay, so what happens in classical conditioning? Okay, so first we have to start with an unconditioned stimulus. So unconditioned means unlearned, okay? Unconditioned means unlearned. So in Ivan Pavlov's classic study here, the unconditioned stimulus is food, okay? So we present the dogs with food. They respond to the food. The response that they show is salivation. This is also an unconditioned response. It's reflexive. It happens automatically. You don't have to teach these dogs how to salivate when you present food to them. You present them with food and they automatically produce this unconditioned response of salivation. Think about yourself also. You know, if you're really hungry and you walk into someone's home and you smell that they are cooking a delicious dinner, you start to salivate also, right? You don't have to stop and think, oh, wow, that smells really good. Maybe I should start salivating. No, it is an unconditioned stimulus that produces that unconditioned response, okay? So unconditioned means unlearned. Okay, so what happens with conditioning? So in classical conditioning then, learning occurs when you pair a neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus. Okay, so remember, unconditioned means it produces that response automatically. Neutral means it doesn't produce any response. Okay, it does not yet produce an automatic response. So in Pavlov's study then, what did he do? He started to take that neutral stimulus of the dog food dish, started pairing it with the unconditioned stimulus of food. Okay, so you pair the food dish with the presentation of food repeatedly. So this isn't something that's just going to happen if you do this one time. You have to do it over and over and over again. And eventually, the food dish itself will bring about the salivation response from the dogs. When that occurs, we say that learning has happened. The food dish then becomes a conditioned stimulus, okay? So conditioned means learned. So now we have the food dish, we present it all by itself to the dog salivates, learning or conditioning has occurred. The food dish then becomes the conditioned stimulus, and the response that the dog shows to the food dish, salivation, now becomes the conditioned response, okay? That's a learned response. So classical conditioning, then, we see it's used every day. Think about advertising, right? So advertisers know that showing you a picture of an attractive person automatically produces a response, right? It's an unconditioned stimulus. This picture of an attractive person produces an unconditioned response. It makes you feel good, right? You're like, wow, she's super hot. All right, I feel good. So what they do then is they will pair these pictures of attractive women, attractive men, with their product, right? So that you start to then associate those pleasant feelings that you get from viewing this attractive person. Now you start to associate those with their product, okay? So then eventually perhaps just seeing this Miller Lite beer will make you feel good. Then we can say that learning or conditioning has occurred. So advertisers use this. They're very savvy about it. We can also apply this to the development of phobias. So if any of you have a fear of a particular object, experience, it may have developed as a result of classical conditioning. So there is a large body of research that says we can learn fear by association. A very famous study in psychology happened in the 1920s, I believe. Watson and his partner Rayner conditioned a young boy, little Albert is what he's known as, to be afraid of white rats by pairing a neutral stimulus, so that's the rats, with an unconditioned stimulus of loud noise. Okay, so basically what they did, look at the bottom here. First, they exposed little Albert to this very, very loud noise. So they would take a hammer and they would bang it against a gong or a garbage can lid, and it would make a really loud noise. And when babies are exposed to loud noises, they cry, right? They don't have to be taught that. They automatically react that way. So they decided then to start pairing this rat with that loud noise. Little Albert still shows the same response, right? He starts crying. Over time, they just start showing him the white rat, and then he cries. So he has been conditioned to fear this white rat, right? He has learned to associate this unpleasantness, this experience of fear with that white rat. What happened with little Albert, though, is interesting because he generalized his fear. So if you generalize something, it means that you're kind of spreading it around. You're spreading it to other things that are similar to the conditioned stimulus. So over time then, Albert was not only afraid of white rats, but he became afraid of things that resembled the white rat. So his fear generalized. He became afraid of one of the laboratory researchers who had white hair. They showed him a Santa Claus beard, which, as you know, has white hair, and he was petrified of these objects as well. Applying this also to reactions to medical treatments. So for individuals who undergo chemotherapy, they might start to associate the waiting room itself with the experience of nausea. Okay, so unconditioned stimulus in this case is the chemotherapy. Okay, so chemotherapy automatically causes the feeling of nausea, right? An unpleasant feeling, unlearned response. Over time then, by going to the same clinic over and over and over again, having this experience of nausea, now, these medical patients start to associate the experience of nausea with just the clinic itself, so that just seeing the clinic or sitting in the waiting room will produce this conditioned response of nausea.